The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days, and neither had the silence between us since the night Mara showed up at my door soaked to the bone, asking if there was room in my bed. I said yes. But what I didn't say was that I was terrified she'd be gone by morning, like everyone else who ever climbed into my life and slipped back out before the sun rose. If stories like this move you, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, in people finding each other when they least expect it, hit that like button, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales so you never miss what comes next. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know who's out there with me. My name is Daniel Farrow, and 2 years ago I moved into a quiet brownstone on the edge of town, mostly to escape the wreckage of a marriage that had ended in paperwork and silence. I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't want to. Grief has a way of making a person build walls out of habit, brick by brick, until even a knock on the door feels like an intrusion. Mara Delgado lived 2 doors down, a woman with tired eyes and a laugh she rationed carefully, as if she couldn't afford to spend too much of it. We exchanged nods in the hallway, borrowed sugar once, nothing more. I didn't know her husband had left 8 months earlier, taking the furniture and most of her savings, leaving her to raise her son Theo alone in an apartment that echoed with too much empty space. The night everything changed, the storm had knocked out power across half the block. I was sitting in the dark with a candle and a glass of whiskey I wasn't really drinking, just holding, when I heard the knock. Soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she should be there at all. When I opened the door, Mara stood there drenched, her son asleep against her shoulder, her voice shaking not from cold but from something deeper, something that had been building for months. She said the heater in her apartment had died along with the power, and Theo was shivering, and she didn't know who else to ask. Then, almost as an afterthought, embarrassed by her own vulnerability, she asked if there was room in my bed, just for the night, just until the storm passed. I said yes. But only if you don't leave tomorrow. I don't know why I said it. Maybe because I'd spent 2 years watching people leave and I was tired of being the one left behind. Maybe because something in her face reminded me of my own reflection in the months after my divorce, that particular exhaustion of a person who has been strong for too long without anyone noticing. She laughed, a real laugh this time, and said I was strange, but she didn't say no. That night, Theo slept in the spare room under 3 blankets, and Mara and I sat in the kitchen until 3 a.m., talking about nothing and everything, about failed marriages and unpaid bills and the particular loneliness of raising a child alone in a city that doesn't slow down for anyone's grief. The next morning, she didn't leave. She made coffee in my kitchen like she'd done it 100 times before, and Theo asked if he could stay another night, and something in my chest loosened for the first time in 2 years. But I want to be honest with you, because this isn't a fairy tale, and love this real doesn't come easy. Mara was guarded. She'd been hurt in ways that made her flinch at kindness, suspicious of anyone who offered warmth without wanting something in return. There were nights she pulled away from me for no reason I could name, nights she'd stare at the door like she was calculating how fast she could run if she needed to. I understood it, even when it broke my heart. Trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild in a straight line. There was a Tuesday in October when she almost left for good. Her ex-husband called, promising he'd changed, asking her to come back for Theo's sake, and I watched her pack a bag with hands that trembled, torn between the safety of the familiar and the terrifying uncertainty of something new. I didn't beg her to stay. I'd promised myself I wouldn't be the kind of man who begs. Instead, I told her that Theo had asked me, just that morning, if I would teach him to ride a bike once the weather turned, and that I intended to keep that promise whether she stayed or not, because some commitments aren't about romance, they're about showing up for people who've learned not to expect it. She stood in the doorway for a long time, bag in hand, and then she set it down. Winter came, and with it came small rituals that felt sacred in their ordinariness. Sunday pancakes. Theo's laughter echoing through rooms that used to feel too quiet. Mara humming while she folded laundry, a sound I hadn't realized I'd been starving for until I heard it fill my home. There was a night in late January that I still think about often, one I never told anyone about, not even Mara herself, not in so many words. Theo had a fever that spiked past what either of us felt comfortable managing alone, and we sat up until 4 in the morning taking turns pressing cool cloths to his forehead, counting his breaths, Googling symptoms neither of us fully understood. Mara kept apologizing, saying she was sorry for bringing this chaos into my quiet life, sorry that a man who'd chosen solitude now found himself awake at dawn worrying over a child that wasn't his own by blood. I remember taking her hand and telling her that chaos built from love was the only kind worth having, that my quiet life before her had never actually been peace, it had only been absence dressed up to look like peace. She cried that night, not from fear over Theo, who recovered within days, but from something else entirely, the slow realization that she had found a place where her exhaustion didn't have to be carried alone anymore. There was also a harder truth I had to face during those months, one that tested me more than I expected. Mara's ex-husband didn't disappear quietly. He showed up twice more, once outside her old apartment building, once outside Theo's school, each time promising change, each time unraveling something in Mara that took days to stitch back together. I had to learn the difference between protecting her and controlling her, between standing beside her and standing in her way. There were arguments, real ones, about how much space to give her fear and how much to push back against it. I wasn't always right. Once I confronted her ex directly, which only made things worse and left Mara furious that I'd made a decision that was hers alone to make. We didn't speak for 2 days after that, the longest silence since the rainy night she'd first walked through my door. But we came back to each other, because that's what people do when the foundation beneath them is real instead of convenient. But healing isn't linear, and there were more setbacks that tested us both. She lost her job in December, and the shame of it sent her retreating into herself for weeks, convinced she was becoming a burden, convinced that any day I'd wake up and realize she wasn't worth the trouble she brought with her. I had to learn patience I didn't know I had, to sit with her silence without taking it personally, to remind her without pressure that my offer had never come with conditions about her being easy to love. There's a particular kind of courage in choosing someone every single day, especially when that someone has been taught by life that love is temporary, that people leave, that safety is an illusion sold to children before the world shows them otherwise. I watched Mara fight that belief every morning she chose to stay, every night she let herself lean into me instead of bracing for impact. And I fought my own battle too, the quiet terror of loving someone enough that losing her would break something in me I wasn't sure could be repaired. By the time spring fully arrived, something had shifted permanently between us, not dramatically, but the way a season changes, so gradually you don't notice until you're standing in entirely different weather. Mara stopped flinching when I reached for her hand in public. She started leaving small things at my place, a hairbrush, a favorite mug, Theo's drawings taped to the refrigerator, tiny declarations that she believed, finally, that this was a place she was allowed to belong to permanently. Theo was riding his bike down the sidewalk without training wheels, wobbling and laughing, falling and getting back up, and Mara stood beside me watching him with tears in her eyes that she didn't bother hiding anymore. She told me that night that she'd almost missed this, almost let fear convince her that a man who said stay could never mean it, that kindness always came with a hidden cost. I told her the only cost I ever wanted was her staying long enough to let herself believe she was safe. If this story has touched something in you, if it's reminded you that second chances are real and that showing up for someone quietly, patiently, without conditions, can change a life, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. We got married the following autumn, in the backyard of that same brownstone, under a sky that threatened rain but held off just long enough. Theo walked Mara down the makeshift aisle, proud in a way only a child can be, and when I said my vows, I told her that the night she asked if there was room in my bed, she'd really been asking if there was room for her, fully, imperfectly, fearfully, in a life that had space for someone who stayed. And there was. There still is. Before I go, I have to ask you something important, and I mean it sincerely. Please leave a comment below and tell me what part of this story moved you the most, because I read every single one, and your words remind me why I keep telling these stories. Some people walk into our lives during a storm and we assume they'll leave when the rain stops. But every so often, someone stays, not because we forced them to, but because we finally gave them a reason to believe that staying was possible. If you believed in Daniel and Mara's story tonight, if you believe that love can rebuild what fear once broke, subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales, share this with someone who needs it, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is leave the door open and mean it when we say, stay.